baby, but she's out of sight. I talked to her across the telephone. I've never seen money, but she's mine, all right. So take my kiss and leave the cat alone. Every single morning you will hear me yell, hey, Central, pick me up along the line. He connects me with my honey, then I ring the bell. And this is what I say to baby mine. Hello, my baby, hello, my honey, hello, my ragtime gal. Send me a kiss, I wire. You hear me, baby, my heart's on fire. If you refuse me, honey, you lose me, then you'll last alone, oh baby.
Hello everybody, Chauptphey here. Today we'll be talking about vulnerability. Emotional vulnerability, to be more specific. I'm sure most of you have heard the term toxic masculinity. A very controversial term, either because of the way it's used, or the people using it, or the misconceptions surrounding it. No, it doesn't mean men are toxic, or that masculinity is toxic. If the people using the term toxic masculinity really thought masculinity as a whole was toxic, they would just refer to it as masculinity. It wouldn't need an adjective. The toxic part would be implied because there's no supposed non-toxic alternative. Toxic masculinity is the idea that there's a positive and negative side to masculinity, with the toxic part addressing the negative side. See, I'd say that when people think of masculinity, they mostly think of its positive traits, such as confidence, physical strength, and devotion to work. Those are all examples of positive masculinity. Toxic masculinity serves to address the negative traits of masculinity, such as misogyny, bullying, and emotional repression. In this video, we'll be focusing on the last one, emotional repression. Man up, Timmy, your father didn't raise no sissy. However, I will make the inductive claim that most people view emotional repression as bad, as of now. In the modern era, the idea of emotional repression has become more and more frowned upon, and the idea of talking about your problems as a man has become more positively appropriated. Great, I guess. End of the story. Society has finally moved past the concept of emotional repression, and we're now at a point where men can be open with their emotions without fear of judgment. On a broad level, of course, not statistical. So, I guess the work is done. Feminism has won. No. In fact, I'm afraid it's not even half. I mean, if that were the case, we wouldn't need the term toxic masculinity, would we? No. We still got a long way to go. But what if I told you that the idea of emotional repression has climbed out of its cave and masked itself as a trend? You might be shocked. Well, remember that shock, because that is what it thrives on, the main reason it has come back. Trust me, it will make sense as we go on. But without further ado, let's talk about emotions. And more importantly, what it means to be emotional. What does it mean to be emotional? Well, vocabulary.com says if it has anything to do with feelings like happiness or anger, then consider it emotional. A coworker who cries at the drop of a hat is overly emotional. If someone says stop being so emotional, they're telling you to calm down because your feelings are out of control. When you're emotional, you're feeling lots of feelings or emotions. Happy, sad, afraid, lonely, mad. An emotional speech makes you stand up and cheer. An emotional movie tugs on your heartstrings. Which seems alright, except for the last part. The opposite of emotional is logical. Logical things have more to do with the head, while emotional things are all about your heart. I've seen this a lot, this idea that emotions and logic are like these mutually exclusive things. And that's not really true. Not that I'm not open to the possibility of it being that way, but if that really is the case, what's your proof for that? Do you have any evidence? Now, I've searched the page for sources, and all I could find was this, usage examples. Now, next to the usage examples, it shows a selection list saying all sources. So, which one is it? Are they usage examples or are they sources? Now, I skimmed through some of these usage examples and they seem to be just that. Examples in which the word emotional has been used. Books that have nothing to do with the subject but just happen to have the word emotional in it. Well, maybe we're just searching in the wrong direction, although I really doubt it. What about science and math? Well, I'm sorry to say this, but these are by no means sources. These are just random examples in which the word emotional has been used in a context relating to science and math. I mean, the fact that in each the word emotional is highlighted with thicker letters should already give it away. But just in case it doesn't, let me just say, I don't think the article "We Are All the Fat Bear Now" by Salon is where they did their research on what it means to be emotional. When it comes to this whole emotion versus objectivity thing, integral psychotherapist Robert Augustus Masters writes in his book Emotional Intimacy, "Can we be objective and emotional at the same time? Yes. An example, you are crying deeply, at last letting go of a relationship that you desperately had tried to keep for a long time. You know right to your core that the relationship is done, and you're grieving its loss. Your uninhibited emotional release washes away what remains of your once stubbornly dug-in stance, leaving you not in a particular position, but rather aware of possible positions. You are far from lost in this grief. You are both hurt, lucidly present, clearly seeing what is going on, beyond any mental analysis. Not surprisingly, research shows that the unrepressed presence of emotions significantly contributes to mental and social skills. Emotions only cloud the sky of rational thought when we lack intimacy with them. And rational thought muddies its own waters when it's cut off from emotion, slipping into, so to speak, an irrational rationality. Distancing, disassociating, numbing, or otherwise estranging ourselves from our emotions hobbles our capacity to act wisely and compassionately. Research has shown that deteriorated emotional functioning, likely caused by damage to brain regions involved in emotional processing, can retard our ability, his words not mine, to make sound decisions, even if our IQ remains intact. So, if you want to make optimal decisions, do not leave your emotions out of the picture. And when he talks about the research, he's not wrong. Let me tell you a story. The story of patient Elliot. Enter a man named Antonio Damasio. Antonio Damasio is a Portuguese-American neuroscientist and a professor of psychology, philosophy, and neurology at the University of Southern California. His research in neuroscience has discovered that emotions play a central role in social cognition and decision-making. One of his patients, patient Elliot, which was not his real name by the way, his real name is protected as with most patients. Elliot had a good job at a business firm, was a role model to his colleagues and younger siblings, and a dutiful husband. Then he started getting headaches, and he discovered he had a tumor in his brain. He eventually had the tumor removed. The surgery was successful, but not entirely, as Elliot had a part of the front lobe of his brain damaged by the tumor. At the time Elliot consulted Damasio, things were still going decently in terms of his overall attitude towards the situation. He was nice and charming, but in terms of his life, things were only going downhill for him. He lost his job due to not completing or correcting the projects he was working on. He lost his marriage. After that he married someone else, someone that his family disapproved of. After that they divorced. Again, he was caught in a money-making scheme with a shady character that ended up in bankruptcy. By the time his referring doctor sent him to Damasio, he was living with his sibling, and as if that wasn't enough, he got denied disability assistance by the government because it wasn't counted as a real disability. Damasio recounts, since for all the world to see, Elliot was a smart, talented, and able-bodied man who ought to get his shit together and get back to work. Several professionals have declared that his mental faculties were still intact, meaning that at the best, Elliot was lazy, and at the worst, a malingerer. Damasio learned that when Elliot was working, he might spend hours trying to decide to order his documents. Should it be by date, pertinence to the case he's working on, the size of the document, and so on. But his struggle with decision making wasn't just limited to work. He could think up options for an ethical decision, like whether or not to steal something for his family, or social goals, such as friends in a new neighborhood. He did great, but even with all the decision making, he could still not choose effectively or just choose at all. His cognitive faculties were all A's. He tested well, given an IQ test or other measures of intelligence. Elliot's long-term, short-term memory language, skills, perception, and handiness with math were all still present. He was not stupid, he was not ignorant, but he acted like he was both. He couldn't make plans for hours in advance, let alone months or years, and it ruined his life. Damasio said in a later interview, "Wisdom, if you choose to accept it, is what happens when you accrue lots of somatic knowledge in your life. If you've been through lots, then you know how you would feel in a wide variety of situations, allowing you to make better decisions, and give as one does better advice. Therein lies the problem. The high reason view. Without the filtering provided by emotions and their somatic markers, the data sets any given decision. Whether it's what to get for lunch or whom to marry would be overwhelming. The working memory can only juggle so many objects at once. To make the right call, you need to feel your way, or at least part of your way, there."
The reason why they can't choose is that they haven't got this sort of lift that comes from emotion. It is emotion that allows you to mark things as good, bad, or indifferent, literally in the flesh. And it is that kind of emotional impetus that they are lacking. They cannot conjure up for a given situation an emotional state that would decide them in one direction or another. And of course, this is something that we all can relate to. We're constantly being swayed in what we do by just a little teeny change, something that comes, for example, from our past experience with a certain kind of situation. But what we remember from a previous situation that is like that is not just the facts, and not just the outcome that it may be good or bad. We also remember whether or not what we felt was good or bad. And this is something that people need to understand, is that when you are making decisions any day of your life, and of course the options you make are going to produce a good or a bad outcome or something in between, you do not only remember what the factual result is, but also what the emotional result is. And that tandem of fact and associated emotion is critical. And of course, most of what we construct as wisdom over time is actually a result of cultivating that knowledge about how our emotions behaved and what we learn from them.
And that's all fine and dandy, but how do we know what it means to be emotional? You know, the main question that we derailed from so much because vocabulary.com's definition was partly wrong. Not that this wasn't important to the rest of the video, and it also plays a crucial part in our argument. I guess the main takeaway is that we are all emotional beings. Emotional activity is present in our brain at all times during consciousness. At least, I can't think of a moment in which it's not. And I am explicitly talking about emotion, not feeling, because there is a difference. I guess the difference between an emotional person and a non-emotional person is the expression of emotions. Someone who lets that emotion out. Someone who expresses that emotion in physical ways, such as facial expression or body language. At least that is what is perceived as being emotional. Now it's time for some good old video responding. A couple months ago I stumbled upon a video called "Some Emotions We Lose, Some We Share, but Never with the Women We Love." And it's actually my primary motivation for making this video, as I think it's harmful for the young men out there. I mean, it has almost 200,000 views and 10,000 likes, so it clearly has some influence. Now, this guy isn't anything special. He's just another red pill MGTOW channel who fearmongers about women and relationships. But this video isn't really about him. He's a grudge for me to make my arguments, since he does represent the opposition pretty well. He pretty much makes all the arguments in favor of toxic masculinity. But the biggest reason why I find this video to be so dangerous and most of all influential, well, wait for that, because it sparks an interesting conversation.
Tonight we're going to talk about 15 reasons why men don't want to talk about their feelings. Why, and I'm going to add in there a few reasons why men shouldn't talk about their feelings, except in certain circumstances. Circumstances. And the reason why is because it's a sign of weakness.
See what I mean? Now, I do gotta say, his video is a bit more nuanced. He doesn't exactly take the position that you should repress your emotions, rather that you should deal with them on your own in your own time. And he does say that there are some cases where it's okay to share your emotions, like for example a breakup. But he still puts forward the idea that it's a sign of weakness, and that in those rare exceptions that you do share your emotions, you should share them with a man and never a woman.
Many people that talk about toxic masculinity and men need to talk about their feelings more, and men need to be in touch and express themselves emotionally. These are women that are saying this.
True.
And the interesting thing is, if you really want to know how women feel about this, go look on a lot of the forums about losing attraction to your spouse, and many of the women that have lost the feelings or the love or the desire or the intimacy desire, right? The real draw to their men. Most of them either have he was crying about he lost his job and he cried. That was it. Man showing weakness. One, he came down with cancer, and even though he survived it, I just wasn't attracted to him anymore because he got sick and he showed weakness. Another was about a man who was crying about his dog, or a guy. He was a young 20-year-old something. He was crying about losing his dog that he'd had since he was like 10.
Okay, so this is exactly why I find this video to be so harmful in the information that it spreads, and why I think it's way more effective than any other person or video spreading toxically masculine ideas. Because most of the time when we talk about toxic masculinity and the freedom for men to express their emotions, we talk about it being other men withholding that freedom. We say that the main reason why men bottle up their emotions is out of a fear of being shamed by their male peers. Just a preface, I suspect it's mainly liberals who think this way. Leftists are not really about impugning individuals, rather we recognize that the root of problems like these are at social systems that everyone in some type of way contributes to, whether they're conscious of it or not. Now, I do recognize that there definitely exists a fear out of being seen as gay or not a real man by other men, but you also gotta keep in mind that straight men don't really care if other men don't see them as manly. Don't get me wrong, it definitely plays a big role, but you get where I'm going with this, don't you? Rather, if women find them manly, since manliness is very much associated with attractiveness. Now, what this does is, it opens up a conversation about if women like sensitive men, or rather emotional men, or rather men that aren't afraid to show emotion from time to time. I got my problems with using the term sensitive. Now, it's important to recognize that making broad generalizations about if women like or don't like a certain thing is really stupid and highly irresponsible. But that doesn't always work for people, does it? Especially when dealing with the red pill community. I mean, if it did, radicalization wouldn't be a thing. So after these disenfranchised young men have seen this guy talk about how women on forums admitted to losing attraction to their men because they showed emotion, simply saying women are individuals just because some women don't like emotional men doesn't mean that all women or even most women don't either. That simply won't work, even if it's completely true, because all that's on their mind is that women on forums apparently don't like it. And saying women are individuals won't change that, so it kinda ends up being an empty statement. As referring to a specific example provides a stronger mental stimulus, it requires a more detailed and well thought out response to counter it. So, let's deconstruct it. Now, it is important to note that he did not cite his sources. He only cited the article that he was going over, but not the forums. So, when he talks about what these women on these forums said, we have to trust that he reports that honestly, which I don't think he does.
He was crying about he lost his job, and he cried. That was it. Man showing weakness.
Nah, don't think I didn't catch that. You added that. She didn't. And by the way, do you really think that a forum is the best place to get a balanced opinion? Because usually, the people with problems, they express themselves on forums. But the people who are happy with their spouses, whether they show emotion or not, don't usually speak up. Also, I wouldn't be surprised if he cherry-picked most of these results, because I did go on forums like this guy said, and Reddit was really the only place where I got some result. With the other forums it was like one result and a common thread of people giving advice. And after scrolling like 34 results, I found one example of a woman who lost attraction to her boyfriend due to him showing emotion. And I know there will be some people saying, well, the fact that it happened is evidence enough. Well, when you're going by that search tag, of course you're not gonna find the opposite. You're not gonna find a woman talking about how she became more attracted to her boyfriend after he showed emotion, because that's not what the search tag is about. The point is that most women who lost attraction to their partners did so because of superficial stuff, like getting fat or losing hair or stuff like that. I continued scrolling and I couldn't find another example of a woman who lost attraction to her boyfriend due to him showing emotion. And at one point I had to stop scrolling because the results started diverting from the search tag too much, to the point where it actually had nothing to do with what I searched for. And let's talk about those specific examples that this guy just showed, shall we? I'm of the opinion that relationships experience highs and lows. And when a dog dies, that's a low, obviously. And in a relationship, you need to overcome that. But it's never easy, because then the relationship will kind of hang on a thinner thread. A lot of times when relationships go through something hard, when the people in the relationship get through it, one of them might say, you know what, I'm kind of glad that happened because it only made us stronger. Because it supposes an alternative where it could have gone wrong and the relationship ended. And it didn't end up making them stronger because the relationship ended. But if the relationship can survive this, then surely it can survive many other things. But obviously that doesn't always happen, and you get cases like this where the relationship had to end. You know, I once saw a show about people who did marriage proposals, who all went to pretty tough hardships. And one of the men had a horrible accident with his business on his farm, and he couldn't walk anymore. And his girlfriend had to wipe his ass. And she did that, and let's be honest, that really isn't the biggest turn on, now is it? And those men also cried, but it's not about being able to show emotion or talking about your pain or your problems. It's about your attitude towards it. Those men may have cried, but at the same time, they didn't give up. They fought back. And whether it was with tears streaming down their face, didn't matter. And now he's walking again. Just to come back to that one example. So it's not the sharing emotion that puts the women off. But if a man shares his feelings and then no longer does anything with his life, then it's like stand up. And you can stand up and cry or laugh or get mad, but it's the doing nothing, becoming a couch potato, that makes the attraction go away. And now listen, I've searched through a lot of these posts that talk about losing attraction to boyfriend. And a main theme I've noticed is that the women who talk about losing attraction to their partners often don't know what the cause is. They lost attraction to their partners and don't know why. And this is actually more common than you might think. And there are examples of this. I'll give one right now. By the way, just quickly before we go over this Reddit post, I just want to say I don't really know and many big female YouTubers I could have reached out to for this voiceover. So meaning that I'm gonna have to read it all on my own, which means that some of this that I'm going to have to read is going to be kind of cringe or weird for me to read, so yeah. My boyfriend 27 and I 26 have been together for 4 years. We were best friends for a year before considering ourselves a pair. The beginning of the relationship started off a little bit rocky because we were each other's first serious romantic partner that lasted longer than 4 months. After hitting the 1 year mark, we both learned how to better get along, compromise, and understand one another's idiosyncrasies. The relationship is very satisfying. Plus, we have a great connection and our families get along perfectly well to the point they'll go on vacations together. But I'm not as sexually attracted to him as I once was. He has attractive physical features, eyes taller than me and broad shoulders, but for a while, I haven't considered him like I did when we first started dating. He typically initiates sex and it takes me a while to get into the mood. We also have sex once every 2 weeks. Sometimes I have to decline because the idea of having sex and making out puts me off. This was never the case when we first started dating or during my previous relationships. I was the one who used to initiate sex and was open to most things inside and outside of the bedroom, but now I feel completely out of whack and uninterested in having sex with my boyfriend. A sentiment I thought I would never have because I want him to be happy, but everything else outside sex is great. We're like cuddly roommates who are the bestest of friends. Over the course of our relationship, he has put on several pounds, 50 pounds, and it's centered around his gut and face, and as a result, my attraction has faded. His responses are that he's bulking, already cut his calories, or is sick and needs excess calories for natural repair. With all that said, I feel a strong sexual attraction to other men or women, just not for my amazingly kind and supportive boyfriend. I'll never cheat on him either, because I would rather break up if it comes to it.
Gosh, I feel like I'm probably being shallow and superficial to allow such small things to concern me, but I feel there may be more to this than I'm understanding. Despite having open lines for communication, he doesn't seem to understand just how much I am not attracted to him. How am I to handle this? Maybe you guys could help. Thank you. If it's the weight gain that's putting you off, then that's a good thing for you to know in how you address it. If there's more to it, then your boyfriend isn't the reason why you're not sexually attracted to him. There's something more going on with you. Your boyfriend sounds suppressed and avoidant. Sometimes people use props, in this case excess weight, to avoid another issue. It doesn't have to be about limiting intimacy, or at least consciously, but can be something much deeper that's grown up for some reason, and he may not be aware of it. But it's not entirely rational to say that he needs 50 extra pounds to heal if he was healthy weight to begin with, or that he's already restricting calories, unless he has a serious health issue developing. And anyway, putting on muscle/using it plays a bigger role in successful weight loss than dieting, so a low return strategy could be hindering its progress too, I suppose. Figure out if it's your lack of attraction is because of him or you. Either way, your boyfriend is being avoidant, and could probably use some support in figuring out what's going on before he starts developing health issues. You're probably right that there is more going on here. I'm probably viewing his weight gain as an excuse for my lack of attraction because it's the most apparent cause. Only problem is that I don't know what the source of the problem is. There may be things not being said from both of us if I have kept something like this to myself for so long. If he's being avoidant, how do you think I could show support and get to the bottom of this? Well, off the top of my head, I could guess a few possibilities. One could be that since everything is so perfect, including that your families are not only happy with your choices, but heavily involved with each other, and that makes it feel like the choice to go be in the relationship was left in your control at some point before you were ready for that. Another option is that there were little things that have bothered one or both of you for a long time that weren't talked about and didn't resolve on their own.
So that's pretty interesting, right? First, she says it's because her boyfriend gained a lot of weight that she lost attraction for him. But when this person suggests otherwise, she admits that that probably is true, and it probably is for another reason. One could be that they hit their relationship wall. This is pretty common, although not unfixable. I'll leave the full article in the description in case you want to check it out. Relationships are complicated, and losing attraction to one's partner is often not as easy as they got fat or they cried. And hitting your relationship wall is one of many subconscious reasons that we might not be aware of. And as a result, we latch on to simple things that we can easily point out for the sake of clarity. And I think that could have definitely been the case for the examples that Better Bachelor just listed. And my intention isn't to be like, look, this proves Better Bachelor is wrong or lying. What I'm saying is to simply be skeptical of claims like these. What I'm saying is that these red pill guys are not above skepticism. They also can be wrong or lie in order to push a narrative, or be blinded by their own emotions or biases. But what I see happening a lot is that people like this get ascribed unquestioned authority because what they're saying is shocking or offensive or controversial, or because they're not given a platform by the general mainstream like the news to say what they're saying, but are instead an independent demonetized YouTuber. Just because something is not controversial to say doesn't mean it's a cover-up for the real harsh truth. Don't dismiss what people say just because it doesn't activate a strong emotional reaction. Normally, this idea that emotion makes you weak would not be okay to propagate. You know why? Because it's a harmful, misandrist lie. But because it's a YouTuber saying it, it's suddenly hip and counterculture? Why? Because men showing emotion has now been so accepted that it's been accepted for too long, and that somehow makes it outdated because it's the new norm now, and the opposite is new, so we need to bring that back as some kind of breath of fresh air. I mean, that's literally describing a meme. Also, men showing emotion has not been fully accepted. Not even close. And it definitely isn't the new norm because of one fucking Gillette ad. Or let me guess, it's because it's associated with MGTOW, and MGTOW is a relatively new movement. Adding an outdated idea to a recent movement does not make it a not outdated idea. It just shows that your movement sucks ass. And this is exactly why I said earlier in my video that this outdated idea has climbed out of its cave, masking itself as a trend, and it relies on feeling of shock. And that's exactly why videos like these have such good ratios. When you deliver your message as a pill, it's more effective. And you can say that all of this is a cope, but that doesn't disprove the fact that what I'm describing here definitely happens. And to deny that, in my opinion, is the biggest fucking cope of them all. Now that we got that out of the way, let's continue deconstructing. I think this whole talk about women losing attraction to their men because they showed emotion is also talk about a certain kind of situation, and a certain demographic of women as well. We all want to be perceived as attractive as possible, and we all have ideas of stereotypes. Like the older generation, we think that the grandmas want to talk about their emotions and the grandpas are shut off and don't do it, and they're supposedly manly, and that the women should be okay with that. But that may be from a generation where women put up with a lot of stuff anyway, and things are changing. And yes, in the younger generation there will be women who just want their men to just shut up and take out the garbage and be this impenetrable rock that never shows vulnerability. But that's a certain type of relationship and a certain type of woman. And I think a lot of these guys think that that is actually the type of woman they're supposed to attract, because to them it's the only type of woman, or at the very least the majority. So they feel like they gotta act like the type of man that that woman would be attracted to, because otherwise they would never get someone, which further boosts the cycle. Maybe these men just don't have perfect judgment, and I don't blame them, because honestly, who does? I recently stumbled upon this Reddit post that said, women who tolerate male vulnerability absolutely exist, but average men lack the time and options to screen for these women. And I thought this perspective was interesting.
Let's shift away from the usual arguments of, you don't like male vulnerability and you're lying if you say you do, and take a more pragmatic look at things. Sure, you absolutely are fine with male vulnerability. Perhaps you even prefer it. And going even further, all of your best girlfriends, mothers, sisters, grandmas, aunts, etc., etc., all hold the same beliefs as you regarding male vulnerability as well. Totally. For the sake of argument, I completely believe you, no sarcasm. And yet, somehow, a large amount of men have anecdotes about expressing male vulnerability once or twice or many times and suffering severe consequences for this. And these men subsequently have decided to simply never be vulnerable with any of their romantic partners ever again, based off of their life experiences. But these women were just bad apples, not representative of all women. These men are just horrible at selecting partners. They need to be more patient and develop better judgment. After all, these women were most likely bitchy bimbos, and these men got hurt as a consequence of bad judgment. And so they need to just be brave and continue to throw themselves in the emotional meat grinder, and eventually they'll find a nice woman who will tolerate their vulnerability, provided they have a good excuse to be vulnerable. But the reality is, these women don't stick out. There isn't a type of woman who is disgusted by male vulnerability. And this isn't to say all women don't like male vulnerability. The problem is, the women who tolerate it and the women who can't are functionally identical. Certainly, there are women who are open about how little sympathy they feel for men, regardless of what circumstances he's in. But the majority of women who have punished men for their vulnerability do not fit this profile at all. They've usually been normal, run-of-the-mill girls next door who you'd never think twice about. Since this argument is almost completely anecdotal on both sides, I'll give my own anecdote. The woman who helped me understand that most women couldn't handle male vulnerability was a far cry from the stereotype most women would expect. She was nice, not conventionally attractive at all, arguably not even unconventionally attractive, nerdy, shy, and bookish. She was even open about her love for sensitive men. You would never in a million years see this girl dating a star quarterback, even if he wanted her. She was by all accounts your stereotypical, homely, good-intentioned girl next door who was rarely given a second glance by most men. And yet, when her boyfriend, a close friend of mine, was going through some really genuinely, undoubtedly shitty stuff with his home life, when he confided in her one too many times, she couldn't help but run to me to complain about how weak he was and how sick of his whining she had already become, which eventually culminated in her breaking up with him. And I don't think that my anecdote is far from many other men's experience. Now, before you jump to say, it wasn't that he showed vulnerability that made her grossed out, it was how he showed vulnerability. But she herself would disagree, because years later when the subject came up, she expressed regret and extreme remorse over how she had treated him. and confusion as to why she would react that way in the first place. The reality is that on a logical and moral level, she probably felt he was justified in his vulnerability, but on a gut visceral, inexplicable level, it was just fucking gross. The reality is that in order for vulnerability to be acceptable, even to women who are okay with it, it needs to be deep into the relationship. Not 6 months, more like 6 years. Wait, I'm sorry, but what the fuck? I have to cut in here. 6 years? That is fucking insane. I mean, I'd already kind of argue that 6 months is crazy, but 6 years? Jesus fucking Christ. And for men, it's like Russian roulette. They have to risk destroying their relationship to find out if their girlfriend is capable of seeing them at their lowest. And sometimes these relationships are really, really, really good in every other aspect for them being able to be vulnerable. So it's not a worthless and toxic relationship that they're throwing away. And a lot of these men regret ever opening their mouths. So it's not some mustache-twirling evil whore dumping guys after they cry about their mother dying. It's almost always usually women who really, really, really want to be okay with their husbands, boyfriends crying on a logical and moral level, but just can't help but lose the tingles after he does, and end up laying next to a man she feels absolutely nothing for after he shows this side of him. If it wasn't clear, the view I'm presenting isn't about whether men should or shouldn't be vulnerable or be allowed to be vulnerable, more that vulnerability presents an inherent risk that arguably isn't worth it if the man has already observed women in his life in the past punishing male vulnerability. He shouldn't be shamed for expecting that in the future and avoiding it.
You know what? I actually completely agree. Don't get me wrong, there are things in this Reddit post that I do disagree with. But of course I agree that men shouldn't be shamed for expecting that in the future and avoiding it if they've already experienced that kind of pain. I don't think that these men just have to be brave and throw themselves in the emotional meat grinder. That is a crazy thing to expect from someone. Just like I wouldn't say hashtag not all men to a woman who's been sexually assaulted, I also wouldn't say hashtag not all women to a man who's been scarred from bad experiences with women when it comes to showing emotional vulnerability. I may disagree with them, but I wouldn't direct that towards them because I get where they're coming from. If you're a dude and you've been repeatedly hurt by women when showing emotion, take some time to heal from that before you get into another relationship. And if anything in this video made you feel like you were being shamed, or like I was telling you to just be brave, or like you were the person I'm criticizing, I'm genuinely sorry, and I completely empathize with your pain. This video isn't even really for you. I'm making this video for the guys who haven't really been in relationships and don't know much about them, that maybe stumble upon videos or arguments like the one I'm criticizing and get swayed by them, specifically emotional guys that maybe feel insecure about being emotional, and as a result they feel like they gotta bottle their emotions up, or they feel like they can't trust women. Those are the guys I'm trying to help, and I may not be able to guarantee them that they won't be shamed for showing their emotions in their future potential relationship, but I also don't want them to feel insecure or weak or like they gotta bottle their emotions up. I just don't want that. Now let's talk about the stuff I disagree with. You say that there isn't a type of woman who is disgusted by male vulnerability. And I'm inclined to agree, but this idea that a woman who is disgusted by male vulnerability and a woman who isn't are functionally identical just doesn't seem right to me. Maybe to you they are. Hell, maybe even to most people they are. But this idea that you can't distinguish between them just doesn't seem right. Most of these guys don't have perfect judgment, and that's okay. I'm not here to shame anyone. Most people lack an incredible amount of social skills, and that is normal and fine. However, I do think that with enough social skills, you will be able to make that kind of judgment. And yes, it's gonna be hard. People who have bad judgment can't just change like that, and I don't expect them to. However, it is an option. Another thing you can do to distinguish between these women is ask them questions before you start dating them, or do anything related with them. And that way, you can find out before it's too late. And once again, I'm not here to try and shame anyone, or victim blame for that matter. I'm just here to try to give advice to the guys who feel like they need it. Second, you say that this isn't to say that all women don't like male vulnerability. But later on you go on to say, and I quote, "The woman who helped me understand that most women couldn't handle male vulnerability." And honestly, I hate that. That, oh, I'm not saying that all insert group of people are like this, I'm just saying it's most. The reality is, you don't know. And neither do I. But the point I'm trying to get across is that your personal anecdote is not enough to prove this. You go on to explain that you had an experience with this girl that, as you said, was a far cry from the stereotype most women would expect. She was nerdy, shy, bookish, not conventionally attractive, arguably not even unconventionally attractive, and was open about her love for sensitive men, but was still disgusted by male vulnerability. That girl existing is a statistical inevitability, and therefore someone is statistically going to have an experience with that girl, and that just so happened to be you. And the fact that that person decided to write about it on the internet does not surprise me at all. And once again, I don't know the statistics. Maybe there are more women like the one you described out there than I thought. I don't know, but neither do you. You don't know the statistics either. And you can't act like you do just because of your personal anecdote. Because there's a fuck ton of other people with anecdotes of how they showed emotional vulnerability and their girlfriends were okay with it, or even liked it. What makes your anecdote better than theirs? The answer is nothing. That's why I refrained from using my own anecdotes and will continue to do so. Conclusion. We don't know the statistics of women who like sensitive men and who don't. And no amount of anecdotes is going to change that. Because you can't possibly read and critically analyze all of them. That's just impossible. And if we keep focusing on anecdotes and individual situations, the conversation will be endless, so we need to wrap it up. The conclusion to be made is that men and women both contribute to the patriarchy. The same patriarchy that tells men it's not okay to talk about their emotions. And while it's true that this is a social system that people don't participate in by choice, we all have internalized some toxic masculinity throughout our lives. Even if we're against it, it's hard to notice, much less break out of, especially when you feel so much social pressure from outside. Trust me, I should know. But the change starts with us, as a collective. And we can change this by fully getting rid of this stupid ass idea that emotion makes you weak. Now, let's get back to the dumb fuck.
The young men going off to WW1, World War II, going off to fight the Germans, going off to fight the Japanese, so on and so forth.
Please don't do this. Please don't make me talk about the military, war, etc. That's a whole other can of worms. This video is already gonna be long enough. Alright, let's keep this short. Now, Better Bachelor has been in the military himself. Whether he's been on the battlefield or not, he does not say. But personally, I'm leaning towards he's not. Because if he had, I think he'd say so, especially in this context. And since only 10% of soldiers who go to combat zones actually get to use combat against their enemies, as opposed to the other 90% who are support troops backing them up. And if he did happen to be part of that 10%, I don't think he'd be citing these historic examples. And people all join the military for different reasons. But I can't go into that, as I haven't been in the military myself. But someone who has been is a YouTuber named Mia Mulder, who did a great video called Why People Join the Military. If you want to check it out, the link is in the description. Anyway, so now he's using situations in the army. Often situations where people had to fight for their lives. And he's bringing that into everyday life, like that is an ideal situation to be in.
These men did not sit in submarines and boats and hold each other's hands and tell sob stories and cry over, their girlfriend that they don't get to see anymore because they've gone off to war. These men had to be strong.
Hold each other's hand? You can't be serious. No, of course they didn't hold each other's hand. But that has nothing to do with emotion or weakness. That had more so to do with homophobia. That was especially extremely present in the days of World War II and I. Also, do you really think that these men who were, according to you, in submarines did not tell each other stories? You think they were just dead silent? In situations such as submarines or bunkers, you are not just shooting constantly. Like, that's not how it works. In fact, you have a lot of time to kill with soldiers that you've known for a very long time and have experienced so much with. Experiences that you've likely bonded over. I mean, it is no secret that there exists a strong comradeship that soldiers have with each other. Do you honestly think that the hours that these men spent in submarines and bunkers, they did not tell each other stories about their girlfriends, for example? I mean, obviously they had partners or children or other family, and they probably did tell each other stories about them. Who are you to say they didn't? Were you around? This is just romanticism. Then you say that these men had to be strong? This is just militarist dogmatism. I never agreed that these things like telling stories or opening up and or crying equaled weakness. You just said that and moved on like we already agreed with that. These were incredibly tough times. Obviously they cried. I mean, their general probably wasn't even around, so what's stopping them? To a lot of these men, these could be their last moments. Do you really think that in their last moments, they're gonna care about looking tough? This obviously stems from the idea that when you're under fire, you can't just sit around crying. Like, yeah, no shit. You can't be sitting around doing anything. Why do you need to single out crying? You can't be sitting around eating either. I guess we shouldn't be eating in front of our girlfriends then. And who says you can't do both? A lot of these guys probably did cry while they were shooting. I mean, it's a pretty normal reaction when you think about it, when you're shooting at other living human beings. I guess the main argument is that it's hard to stay concentrated while crying. I mean, some of the main causes of losing concentration are, after all, trauma, stress, or depression. Things that could maybe make you cry. But guess what? Crying is also something that can relieve those emotions. Researchers have found that crying can clear your mind because then you are getting it out of your system.
When I joined the military, 18 years old, you go to the MEP station, you fly down, you're unloaded, and next thing you know, you're in basic training. People are screaming at you, you're sleep deprived for 24 hours to put you in a stressful environment.
Which is something that can seriously make you lose concentration as well, by the way.
And that night when we went to bed, we had probably 30 beds in a bay, total of 60 in this kind of almost like hangar. And each guy had a cot 4 or 5 feet from another cot next to him. And you'd hear every guy just quietly crying in their beds.
Good. Get it out of your system. It's healthy.
Did we all get up and sit up around, hold hands and sing Kumbaya? No. You just dealt with it quietly. You got through the stress, you got it out of your system, and then you went to sleep.
But what difference would it have made if they didn't cry quietly? Don't get me wrong, it's probably not a good idea. You're probably gonna get beat up. But that's not because you're showing emotion. It's because you're making noise while people are trying to sleep. Especially if they're, as you just said, sleep deprived for like a day. You could be laughing for that matter and it wouldn't make a difference. But one thing that is true is that you are not allowed to cry in the military. You will get scolded for doing so. But what good does that actually do? What good does bottling your emotions actually do? Well, research has shown that it actually only has negative health effects. I mean, it has been proven that people who bottle their emotions up are more likely to have high blood pressure and as a result be angrier. I mean, there was this whole experiment where it was tested that people who bottled up their emotional reaction to scenes in movies were more likely to show signs of anger. So it has negative health effects. And I know there are going to be some people that are like, well, they need to be angry for the battlefield. They need to have that anger for the battlefield, and that's why the general has them bottle up their emotions. Well, yeah, but that argument kind of falls flat, as you can't be angry while shooting. That actually doesn't help at all. Like, this isn't a movie. You need to be focused and concentrated. I know, like, for some people this actually does something good, but the real world isn't a movie where someone gets angry and they're just like, like, that's not how it works. And by the way, there are plenty of people who've done incredibly physically and or mentally demanding tasks and have cried as a result of doing so, or while doing so. So, what's the problem? Emotional repression, however, can have very dangerous impacts. And since we're on the topic of the military, let's talk about veterans. It's no secret that a lot of veterans suffer from trauma. Reaction to this trauma can be anxiety, headaches, depression, flashbacks, skin rashes, nightmares, panic attacks, feeling detached, racing heartbeats, alcohol, drug and substance abuse, and stomach and intestinal problems. And without seeking help, this can result into alcohol and drug abuse, reliving terror, heart attacks, depression, dementia, suicide and stroke. Speaking of suicide, even though veterans only make up for 7% of the American population, they account for 20% of its suicides. This can arise from seeing dead bodies, sexual harassment, being shot at, loneliness, killing people, being ambushed, worrying about family and getting hit by mortar fire. And that's not even talking about all the negative health effects of negative self-affirmation, telling yourself you're weak. What do you think that does to your psyche? Do you think that makes anyone feel better? No. If you're telling yourself you're weak constantly, then you'll actually believe that, and then you'll never get better. And it has been scientifically proven that talking about these traumatic experiences helps individuals heal from them. Some other health impacts of suppressing your emotions long term are diabetes, heart disease, problems with memory, aggression, anxiety, and depression. There's also plenty of data that supports that sharing your emotions helps relieve them, and sometimes we just need a second opinion, as we are obviously not always the best judges. And I think for a lot of people, coming to terms with that may be kind of hard. It may require us to swallow our pride and come to the realization that we can't do this on our own, as much as we like the idea of doing so. It's just not realistic. It's honestly kind of utopian. Something like, I don't want to be sad, but if I try hard enough, I can stop the sad. Reality is often way more complex. But you know what? Since we already got the opinion of one person who served in the military, I think it's only appropriate that we get to see the opinion of another one, or at least someone whose son served in the military. The story of, and I really hope I don't butcher this, John Gaines. Always the alpha male. I was used to denying myself any show of weakness. I had to show strength, control, and the ability to fix anything with a roll of duct tape. But I learned that duct tape can't fix some things, like a broken heart or family relationships when there are differences in grief expression. I lost my son, Airman First Class John Wesley Gaines Jr., on June the 2nd, 2009, to suicide, 5 days before his squadron deployed to Iraq. He was a security policeman, stationed at Moody Air Force Base in Valdosta, Georgia. Wesley's death was not PTSD related, but a result of a domestic dispute with his wife. His death came as a shock. I got a phone call while I was at work. I was stunned, numb, and sick all at the same time. Low rates, fast closings. We can lower your VA loan payment with less paperwork and fast closing. My friend at work, who was and is my brother in Christ, confronted me and prayed for me while I tried to process the news. I can remember calling Wesley's cell phone and over praying he would answer, and hanging on each word as I listened to him tell me to leave a message. My heart will forever have a tear in it from losing him that day. Coupled with my grief, the dark circumstances of Wesley's death sent me on a path of self-inflicted shame. I operated in a fog for several months and dreaded having to answer questions of how he died. It was the look people gave me that I hated the most. That how do I get out of this look of total discomfort? I've since learned how to put others at ease as I offer my story to them. After attending a support group at Fort Lee, Virginia, and getting connected to TAPS, I started moving forward in my grief. My wife, Maria, and I attended our first TAPS National Military Survivor Seminar in 2010 with great apprehension. Knowing neither what to expect nor anyone there made us cautious of opening up to anyone the first day. However, as the weekend went on, we realized we were in the right place, with the right people, who made us feel like family. Finally, we had found a safe place to cry, listen, talk, think, and just breathe. Advertisement. In August 2014, I found myself at Montana Men's Retreat in Chico Hot Springs, Montana. My primary purpose for attending, I wanted to pass my lingering feeling that Wesley didn't measure up to those who lost their lives on the battlefield. In my heart, he already was my hero, and still is. The love for him is still very strong, and I miss him. I miss him so much. That evening was a turning point in my grief journey. The directional change in my path that has allowed me to live again, in finding my new normal. I've also discovered that life doesn't have to be so gloomy anymore. I don't experience guilt when I laugh or have a good time with family, friends, and colleagues. I'm living my own life, and still remembering the life of my son and the joy he brought to the world. Remembering his laugh and smile gives me joy still. Being able to live this normal life and remember him without conflict is a great feeling. I now have been to Montana Men's Retreat 3 years in a row. It's not just about the fly fishing, horseback riding, horseshoes, breathtaking panoramic views, and solitude. Lifelong bonds are made as the men find their perfect environment to freely express feelings both verbally and physically. During those few days in the vast wilderness of Montana, a brotherhood forms. There are no judgments of comments made or emotions expressed. Our loved ones and accomplishments are celebrated as powerful stories are shared. The experiences have allowed me to explore my feelings. I've bonded with other surviving men. I've learned that in Big Sky County, surviving a grief that seems unfathomable is best done with other men with the courage to face their own brokenness. I've looked across the room at a gathering across the table while sharing a meal, and have known that the face looking back understands. He understands that men are different from women, and we grieve and process loss accordingly. He understands the need to weep in secret when no one can see or hear. No need for that in Montana. There, real men do cry. And we learn that crying is healthy and can be done anytime, anywhere, even in front of others, including the women in our lives. Supporting each other during these retreats comes naturally, and lifelong friendships are cemented. Support systems are created. Being told I helped someone else during the short time we were in Montana is humbling, especially when it comes from multiple people. I never know what I have said or done to make others feel that way, but it's a great warm feeling that brings me back each year. Being told I made an impact during my first 2 men's retreats convinced me to become a TAPS peer mentor. And the support I've gotten from these men spills over into my relationships once I return home. I now know it's okay to expect others in my life to support me just as I support them. My wife does a great job of acknowledging when I need that support, and the skills I've gained have allowed my wife and me to take one step, one day at a time, as we journey through our grief together. No duct tape required. And if after all of this there are still people who don't like it when men cry, I will tell them what they've been telling young men for way too long. Suck it up. No one cares.